One of the things that we're becoming more and more aware of is that we really should be considering EDI when we develop our research projects. We're not talking about different individuals in the research program. We're talking literally the experiment that I'm doing today. How can I consider EDI in that experiment? And it's important that we've started to recognize this. Everything about EDI is because data has come out that has taught us new things, and we're trying to therefore change our practices to be able to, be better at things we do. So the data showed when we don't consider the diversity, for instance, of our animal model, or we don't consider the diversity even of cell in a little petri dish, that sometimes we can come up with conclusions in data that leads us to conclusions that don't actually represent the truth. Like they do represent the truth for that particular model, but they can't be applied effectively towards a diverse human population.
When we talk about the research, EDI in research design, it is much more related to how you actually think about your research project from a perspective where EDI is embedded throughout the development of the project. If you start thinking a little bit about how you can look at it from the perspective that you are benefiting those broader populations, then in that case, you might come up with an answer that would actually change the project itself.
I teach the graduate research methods course, and I teach, a very simple thing, sampling, population sampling. So, we are looking at, sampling, what is the right size, heterogeneity versus homogeneity. And there is not a single group nobody can claim, unless you are able to get the 7 billion or 8 billion population all included in the study, you cannot claim that. So when doing research, I feel like it is, whatever research it is, I think that diversity and the inclusion are extremely, extremely important. Those parameters are very important variable.
The classic example is about the design of seatbelts in cars and how they were designed for a human of a certain height and size and weight. And basically there was a flaw in that research in that it didn't account for a certain variable. And so to me, equity, diversity, inclusivity is just a basic variable in all research. You can't separate it. You can acknowledge it and say that in this particular research that you're doing, it isn't relevant. Maybe I'm just studying women authors, in which case, yes, of course, I won't be looking at authors of another gender. But even just having that moment of going, have I accounted for all the variables, means you're already doing better research. And so I think it's intrinsic. It's part of doing research.
The autistic community right now is really, really concerned about language, and they really want to move away from this deficit-based understanding of neurodivergence. And so we often will spend a lot of time changing the language, certainly in like any kind of research communications, like any kind of information sheets or on websites. So even in our articles, we want to make sure that everything that we're writing, even if it's acknowledging the challenges that many autistic people face, that we're doing it in a way that protects dignity. And so when I think about integrating EDI into research purposes, it's really around how do we present and protect the dignity of the group or, individuals that we happen to be writing about.
In my view, what is most important is to have people with lived experience as part of the design phase of any research, really. Because the first question that I often ask is, who is this for? So having patient partners, for instance, is a great way to include, to be inclusive in your research, because really you want to do research that is meaningful, that will have a lasting impact. So finding out what is this research about, who is the target population, and bringing those people early on, I think is critical.
I'll give you a quick example. We want to develop a research project about health in the community, right? And you are trying to develop a research project to improve the overall health in a specific community. So in that case, is it worth for the researcher to ask themselves if they need to be looking at different segments of the population? Do they need to be looking at different ages, different socioeconomic levels? Do they need to be looking at how people experience access to health services in terms of race and ethnicity? Is it different for specific people from specific races or from specific ethnicities in the way they experience the health system? Is it worth for us to be asking questions about, how people, in terms of access to spaces, how do we shape this space? Is it worth for me to be asking these questions in relation to this project that is about health in the community, right? So when researchers start to expand and ask these questions within the development of the research project, then they are talking about EDI in research design, which is one of the requirements now for any federally funded project, research project that is being funded today, that they address the needs of as many populations as possible.
When we think about research, we do it to benefit humanity. And so when we really take a step back and think about how is this going to impact people in a variety of different experiences, a variety of different contexts, are we going to build research that supports everybody, or are we going to build research that supports just one group of people? Because the problem with that is that often when we focus very narrowly, then we sometimes don't even hit the people that we expect that we're going to. If we think, I'm just doing this research to benefit people in Canada, well, sometimes by artificially focusing on Canada, we make assumptions about what that means. We make assumptions about the people who would be included in that, which can exclude a lot of Canadians. It can exclude a lot of people. Even within that narrow subset of humans, we suddenly lose a big chunk of people, and our research isn't even achieving the goals that we wanted it to, let alone being expansive and applicable beyond that.
If you're doing biological research like I am, then you're trying to say, well, how is the age of whatever model I'm working with, how could that affect my result? Because maybe my result is not an all-encompassing result. It's a result for that age. Well, maybe that's also the sex of the animal, right? Maybe that result applies just to that sex. What if it's even genetic backgrounds, people with different heritage will have different disease burdens and different background, so same thing. To what extent am I representing a larger diversity? Now, if I'm not, it's okay. I just need to be very clear that I am aware of the fact that I am, representing X, and hopefully somebody else's research will then also very clearly say what they're representing. And if we're representing different biologies, then together we can start to understand the complexity. Or I need to try to design my experiments so that I try to capture more diversity. So for instance, I use mice that represent a mouse model that represents one sort of biological background, and then another that represents a different one.
I would tell my students, keep your mind open to other variables when you're collecting your data. I am in the social sciences, but this goes for other people as well. In the social sciences, when we are collecting our data, when we're paying attention to analyzing those variables, look at other variables that may be creating noise that you're not even aware of it. There is, I do assessment, and there is not a single time that other things came up as variable. Gender was always a variable that stood out for me. Language always stood out. So we cannot just claim that we cannot have them, an EDI perspective into how we are doing research and not answer it. There is never a homogeneous group. It is always heterogeneous. We are all diverse, everything that you're studying. One of the example I give is from studies that were done in the 50s about, heart medicine or diabetes medicine. That has actually been exclusively the results were fine, and everybody was, the medicine was validated and everything, but it was on samples of white men. It didn't even work for black men. And this is in the United States for the African American men. So they needed to redo the studies so they can actually readdress its validity for a specific population. So we are progressing, and as we are progressing, we see that there is much more to EDI in research than we actually think.